Hello, my name's Steve Melia from the University of the West of England, and this presentation will report on a survey which I conducted with Caroline Bartle last year as part of a European project called Replicate, in which our university is involved. It is, as far as we're aware, the only large-scale survey of e-bike users which has been conducted in the UK in recent years. It was conducted online and sort of publicised through a range of different channels. Some of them were cycling-related organisations, so there is that bias, if you like, within the survey, but we also used more general channels, including some paid Facebook advertisements. Roughly 2/3 of the respondents were or had used e-bikes in the past. Just over 1 in 10, interestingly, had used electrically assisted cargo bikes, which seemed to be a sort of a growing segment of the market. 30% of the sample was female. Now that was after we commissioned a couple of additional sort of booster channels, particularly targeting women. So it seems that the sort of male-dominated pattern of cycling in the UK is also applying in a similar way to e-bikes. As with some other studies of e-biking, this came as no surprise that the sample was particularly weighted towards older age groups, generally sort of above average household income and above average car ownership. The female respondents were, on average, younger, more highly educated, more likely to be in employment, whereas the male respondents were more likely to own a car. Some of these other factors complicated the analysis which we did of gender differences. So many of the differences in response when we did a bivariate comparison became statistically insignificant when we conducted a regression controlling for those other factors. Typically, most of the current e-bike users would use them several times a week, but less than daily. And interestingly, over 3/4 continued to use conventional bikes. And that is quite significant for much of the analysis which followed. When we asked people why they bought an e-bike, the responses contained a paradox, because the two most common responses were for exercise and also it is less effort to ride than a conventional bike. Now, as we'll see later on, this is part of a pattern where for most people the e-bike gradually or progressively replaced conventional cycling, and in many cases these were people who for one reason or another, said that they would have been unlikely to continue conventional cycling or unlikely to continue in the same way. Now, amongst those who used the e-bike to commute to work, they formed roughly a third of all of the commuters, slightly fewer than those who drove, with the other modes sort of distributed amongst a sort of a wide range, including those who generally worked from home. Now, for those who commuted by e-bike, the most common mode replaced was driving. However, when we dug a little deeper into the e-bike commuters, we discovered that those who always commuted by e-bike were more likely to be replacing conventional cycling, whereas the occasional e-bike commuters were more likely to be replacing driving. We selected 10 people from amongst the respondents for some sort of in-depth qualitative telephone interviews to try and understand some of the issues which emerged through the survey in a little more depth. And amongst the themes which commonly recurred were many to do with health or fitness, how e-bikes were able to extend people's cycling into older age, how it enabled people to continue cycling, or in a few cases to take up cycling, despite health limitations or disabilities. And in many cases, this was helping people to regain a cycling identity which they feared they had lost. Some people in the survey had commented that the e-bike enabled them to cycle further, or to tackle more hills, or to ride in worse weather or in heavier traffic, and those themes sort of came through in the interviews as well. People had quite a lot to say about road conditions and infrastructure. Two of the responses which surprised us were that 85% of e-bike commuters used cycle lanes and or cycle paths on their routes to work. And 25% said that they usually took a longer route in order to use a cycle path. One of the interviewees you can see here who cycled with children was explaining how he and his wife would make a particular point of choosing the lower traffic routes and including the separate cycle routes when their children were with them, either cycling on their own bikes or in the electric cargo bike which they owned. Another owner of a cargo bike expressed some frustration at the quality of the cycling infrastructure, and really was sort of calling on the authorities to say, wake up, these are a growing proportion of the bikes on the road, and the infrastructure should be capable of accommodating them, which in many cases it isn't. So, to sum up, at present it seems e-bikes are mainly appealing to existing or former cyclists. They do have the potential to fulfill other needs and to widen the pool of people who cycle. The barriers to that are, in the most part, similar to the barriers to cycling in general. Now, we conducted this survey before the COVID pandemic and before the UK government's Damascene conversion to the cause of cycling. In their cycling vision, gear change, there is both a commitment to up the ante on infrastructure and also to introduce a subsidy scheme for e-bikes. To what extent the good intentions expressed within that document and the local design note will apply in practice remains to be seen. The important decisions will be taken at local level. The conclusion that we came to from this survey was that the success or the failure of that new strategy will impact e-bikes as much as it will conventional cycling.